Stalker 2: Heart of Chernobyl is not for the faint of heart. It's built to generate the kind of friction that goes a long way in creating a challenging and punishing game that's also captivating. When you're left to figure things out for yourself amid myriad dangers that can kill you in a moment's notice, it becomes clear that the survival instincts embedded in the Stalker series are very much alive in this long-awaited sequel. But there's also an equal and opposite force at play, the type of friction that hinders you from engaging with it in earnest, like poor technical performance, frustrating bugs, and bizarre enemy behavior.
You still here, Stalker? Get going!
Yet, for all that's working against it, there's an underlying greatness in how Stalker 2 immerses you into the mysteries within its massive and brutal wasteland. The Chernobyl exclusion zone, the site around the tragic real-world nuclear disaster in 1986, remains the heart of Stalker, both as a harsh and often stunning open world and a fascinating setting that's integral to Ukrainian history. In this fictionalized version, physics-defying anomalies work as deadly hazards scattered around its huge map, while hostile and mutated wildlife instill an ever-present danger. And stalkers, the mercenaries who make a living in the zone taking on risky jobs, are also on the hunt throughout.
What makes you think you're gonna get out of here alive?
When it's hard to tell who's friend or foe, it's a harsh place to exist in. In that respect, Stalker 2 is a masterclass in atmosphere. Phenomenal dynamic weather, pitch dark nights, and radioactive storms that paint the sky a hellish red or toxic green are visually striking and petrifying. From the vistas of a sprawling wasteland you get on long on-foot treks between missions, to the dark corridors of an abandoned facility, Stalker 2 creates such a distinct sense of place and in great detail. It's familiar to anyone who's played the originals, and as a veteran of those games myself, it's an odd comfort to be back in the zone and see how much it's changed in the years since. The early hours of the story aren't going to light a fire under you. Skiff, our character, is set up and betrayed in the opening mission, which leads you through a wild goose chase of finding a continuous chain of guys in hopes of finding the actual guy you're looking for. But once it starts to rope you into the scientific organization S.T.A.L.K.E.R,
we're on the brink of the most important event in human history.
And the zone's de facto military known as the Ward, Stalker 2 begins to show you what it's really about. It weaves in familiar themes seen in the previous games, such as chasing the truth about mind-bending psi emissions, the deadly risks of research and the fallout, and the futility of vying for control in the zone.
It's brave of you to come to my camp, uninvited.
While it's not required to understand this new story, it was enticing to see all the ways the old Stalkers were tied in and referenced as well. I'm glad it drew me in because Stalker 2 is a long game, and at times it can be exhausting since you're constantly fighting for your life. It took me about 45 hours to finish the main story, along with a good chunk of side missions and freeform exploration. Side quests can bring in some much needed cash or lead to rare loot, or they may not even pay off at all. However, there is sometimes an intrinsic value in seeing where it takes you and learning about the world itself.
Is it true that there are no missions on the mainland?
Within this lengthy journey are some critical choices that determine who you align with and affect the path along the way. Although they may lead to the same destination, the way the story context and mission objectives change makes those choices feel impactful, especially because they come up very naturally.
Cigarette?
Rarely are there explicit telegraphs for what the outcomes or consequences may be, and understanding what those choices imply requires you to really pay attention to what characters say in dialogue. And through that, Stalker 2 is a suspenseful thriller with some impressive cutscenes and performances that bring the series to a new height.
Once we were his children. And what are we now?
Games like this are quite rare to see at such a scale these days, and even 14 years since its last iteration, Stalker 2 retains a lot of the design principles of the series, for better and worse. It leans into mechanics commonly seen in hardcore survival games, where you must make deliberate decisions on how to engage enemies and what to pack with limited inventory weight. There's gear wear that can cause malfunctions, high damage in combat, and statuses to manage like bleeding, hunger, and radiation. There's no easy fast travel around the zone, so if you want to get from place to place quickly, you need to find the right NPC and pay up. If you go on foot, you're in for a long hike with rogue stalkers, anomalies, and mutants who can stop you in your tracks. These systems are inelegant, though at times I mean that as a compliment because I admire how very little is streamlined. This isn't an RPG in a gameplay sense either, so there are no progression systems or skills to unlock. So you're on the constant hunt to find good gear, upgrade it at shops, and maintain its condition. I start to see how its mechanics come together after enough poking and prodding, and I managed to find the type of friction I enjoy. Now, combat bounces between intense high-stakes shootouts or tedious wars of attrition. The main problem is in the bizarre behavior of the enemy AI. Regardless of difficulty setting, enemies are often dumb as rocks, reacting in nonsensical patterns while engaged and unaware of their surroundings. Yet their immediate pinpoint accuracy and near-perfect vision, even in pitch darkness, still make things tough, and not in ways that entirely make sense. Erratic mutant movement is more annoying than it is challenging, and you'll just bang your head against the wall trying to land shots on radiated rats and dogs chaotically lunging at you. I learned to work within the confines of sporadic enemy AI, always ready to patch up and heal to survive and take precise shots from smart positions. Sometimes fights break out from conversations gone awry, and enemies are very quick on the draw, and I just had to concede the fact that I would take massive damage if I survived at all. The bright spots within those combat encounters are satisfying though. Stalker 2's great gunplay picks up a lot of the slack in combat's faults. Whipping around a decked out assault rifle with a nice red dot sight or pumping shells into a mutant with a fully modded shotgun had me looking forward to those tense kill or be killed situations. The flow doesn't change drastically over time, but the tension stays consistent throughout. In addition to a few ambitious sequences in the main story, Stalker 2 impresses with how it weaves in psychological horror with psi emissions that genuinely mess with your perception of its world. There are moments where I was as surprised as I was shook by how vulnerable they left me. It's one of the many ways Stalker 2 effectively layers on a unique sense of danger. Within those highs, however, is the frequent reminder that Stalker 2 isn't in great technical shape, and this is after the day one patch. Even on a PC with an RTX 3080, a 13th gen Core i7 CPU, 32GB of RAM, and an NVMe SSD, it chugs on modest settings. Playing with everything on low graphics options and balanced DLSS gives me similar frame drops and major hiccups as it would on medium to high settings with higher quality DLSS, even if the baseline frame rate is marginally better, but still well below a consistent 60 FPS. The patch definitely helped make performance somewhat more consistent compared to the pre-release version I began playing on, but in its more dense and detailed areas, my FPS still tanked to being just barely playable. Thankfully, the game-breaking bugs that halted my progress pre-patch are now gone, and I have not run into any more glitched quest objectives since then. However, several problems still persist that include, but are not limited to, NPCs walking through walls, glitched UI elements, textures artifacting, sound effects and dialogue happening out of place, and environmental details or objects clipping through each other. Inoffensive, non-critical bugs can be whimsical in some sense, but the frequency of these issues chipped at my enthusiasm. It's hard to say whether or not these things will be patched in due time, although developer GSC Game World has stated their commitment to continually working on them with future updates.
Isn't it beautiful?
The current technical performance and roster of bugs hold Stalker 2 back from reaching its full potential, as it still feels as though it's held together by duct tape. Given the story of GSC Game World's tumultuous development time, which has partially taken place amid an actual war zone in its home country of Ukraine, it's not hard to understand why. It's a miracle that Stalker 2 even exists, especially considering how ambitious its world is and how it executes on its vision on a conceptual level.
It's alive!
When it's firing on all cylinders, Stalker 2 Heart of Chernobyl is a rare treat that scratches the itch left behind by those older PC games, where the onus was on you to figure out how to survive and thrive in an unforgiving world that doesn't care if you live or die. It's refreshing, brutal, and a masterclass in creating a brooding atmosphere that I loved basking in, bringing new life to a place as tragic and desolate as the Zone. Once the main quest gained momentum, the choices I made and the work required to reach the end left me invested in a suspenseful story that builds on the ambitions of its predecessors. There are, however, foundational problems that are hard to ignore, like bizarre enemy behavior in combat and the many bugs and performance issues that persist after launch. But for those with the patience and determination required for a massive, intentionally inelegant shooter, those are inconveniences worth enduring. Stalker 2 is a gripping exploration of Chernobyl, and there's just nothing like it. If you're jumping into Stalker 2 yourself, be sure to check out the many guides we've made to make your trip to the Zone as smooth as possible. And for everything else in the world of gaming, stick with IGN.